Getting back to it.
Hmm.
We had a little upset, but it's okay. We're gonna keep moving forward because
For
I feel like
sure.
we were really touching on
Yeah.
a subject,
Yeah.
and like with this situation, a lot of people need to hear this.
Yeah. And so I was just talking about how physically you can manifestate the grief and the hurt in your body from the mental anguish of grief, right? I've
Mm-hmm.
had several people who did not process their grief and allowed it to continue. And it literally was so bad that their body started to deteriorate because
Mm-hmm.
their mental health was at risk, right?
Mm-hmm.
They were not eating, drinking, and like their life was different. And they didn't
Mm-hmm.
know how to process that. So their body didn't know how to process what they were going through mentally.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and so I do like to tell people sometimes, just like they tell you stress can kill,
Mm-hmm.
grief is also a level of stress, a
Yes, it
level of
is.
trauma. And so, because of that, it can show up in your body.
And it showed up in mine, y'all. I was
Yeah.
like, I thought I was having a heart attack. I'm not gonna be. I'm
Mm.
like, I'm too young to be having a heart attack. I was at work. I was like, should I call the ambulance? I was telling my supervisor, like, I don't feel
Hmm.
like I started shaking, then that stopped. Then my
Hmm.
chest was hurting, like it was squeezing. So I went to the emergency room and they were is everything okay? You know how you go through something and you
Hmm.
just existing. And
Yeah.
then they take that one person to be like, everything okay. And then for me it was the doctor, like
Right.
everything okay. I just fell
Yeah.
apart.
You let it out. Yeah.
Fell apart. And what happened was my grandmother, she was the person who was supporting me through that grief.
Hmm.
So she was like, come on over my house. You know, grandma do, come on over
Hmm.
my house,
Hmm.
sit down, let's talk. I was like, I don't really want to talk. I just
Hmm.
want to sleep.
Yeah. Yeah.
And, and
So you were going through a state of depression.
yeah,
You just wanted to isolate. A lot of people do that, right? They don't want to talk, and I think it's okay that you're like, hey, I need some time.
mm,
But I think at a certain level, you do have to allow yourself to come out of that isolation
mm,
and be around people. Because what happens is, until you are intentionally not isolating, you will continue to go deeper and deeper into yourself,
that's
meaning
true.
your own thoughts,
That's true.
your own heart. Everything will be a situation where you're trying to figure it out. Why this happened?
Mm.
Why did God do this to me?
Oh, come on.
Uh,
Hold on. Let's stay right there. Let's stay right there.
yeah, yeah.
Why did God do this to me? Because I feel like a lot of people
Hmm.
feel that way when they lose someone or when they lose something that they just can't let go of.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
And it's like we become accusers of God. Like, God, you did this. Why you do this to me? Why you take, because I know a lot of times for me, because right after I lost my stepfather, I lost my grandmother 9 months later.
Wow.
And in the midst of that, I was a wreck. I mean, at this
Yeah.
point, there was no support for me when it
Mhm.
comes to trying to figure that out because I was a senior in high school. I was going through graduation, and for me, it was like, why you take my grandmother?
Mhm.
And to this day, I remember those thoughts like, why you take my grandmother, God? Why you ain't take that grandmother?
Yeah,
Like,
yeah.
that was my support, that was my rock. Why am I about to cry?
It's okay. It's okay.
And
You
I
just gotta let it go.
I was just like so upset. And I was, like that pushed me. You know how sometimes things push you towards God.
Yeah.
That pushed me further and further
Yeah.
and
And
further
and
away.
that's one of the things that God gave me today, is that a lot of people are still mad at God,
Mm,
right? They're still mad at God because and I can only resonate with you because that's how I felt, right?
mm,
When my mother passed away, I said, you healing all these other people of cancer.
mm,
Why couldn't you heal my mother? Now, my mother was, I'm a preacher's kid, so my father is still an elder, but my mother was a minister.
mm,
And she was kind and she was, and it's like you got these murderers and
mm-hmm.
robbers and
No, for
all kinds of
real.
people out here, and you want to take my mother. You want to take the sweet, like I
Right.
don't understand this. And so for me, it took me a long, and I feel like for a long time, some of my destructive behavior that I did was like my FU to God.
Mm-hmm.
It was
Mm-hmm.
like, oh, okay, don't worry about it. I'm gonna be out here doing whatever I'm gonna
Okay.
do because you want to took my mother.
No, YOLO.
No, for real. And so what I now, as I have matured in my grief, and as I have matured in my relationship with God, I realized that Him taking my mother was not a punishment.
Mm.
Right? It's not a punishment, but also just because He did not answer my prayer about healing my mother did not mean He did not answer my prayer.
Come on now.
Right? So
Right.
He answered my prayer, just not in the way that I wanted Him to answer. And a lot of us have a hard time dealing with the fact that He did not answer the way we wanted Him to.
And it's so crazy because when you just said answer our prayer, the leading up to my grandmother's death, I didn't come to the hospital. And that was the one time that me and my grandmother weren't on good terms because we fell out. I was being a teenager. We fell out. She went to the hospital. It just wasn't reconciled. And the day that I actually went to the hospital, I saw my grandmother. She had tubes, all this connected, couldn't speak, and I was just like, I sat in the waiting area. I remember this. I sat in the waiting area and I said, God, I know my grandmother holding on just for me. I know she holding on just for me. Because everybody else said when she was talking, she was like, hey, Iron Prom coming up. Take this money. I got this money in my pocket for this dress. I want to see her. Tell her come up here, this, that, and that. And I was just like, But I sat there when I saw her and I said, Lord, let your will be done. Because I don't want her to suffer no more. If this is what you need to do it.
Yeah.
And I remember I walked to the bathroom. I came back out and I saw my sister. She was tearing the hospital up, falling out crying. And I said, Lord, why?
Yeah.
Because right then and there I changed my mind. But I was already at peace. I was at peace with it initially, but He answered that prayer. Because that was His will.
Yeah.
And for a long time, I remember when I would pray, I would never say, Lord, have your way, let your will be done.
Yeah, because you know what it meant at that point. At that point, you have experienced that. And I think our stories in this are similar in the fact that my mother had had a surgery and she was fine. Right? So when she went to the hospital, I did not understand it because I was like, she had a surgery, she had her breast removed, she was in remission, she was fine.
Right.
So then all of a sudden she in the hospital, and this was the day before Valentine's Day. I'll never forget. And my father's like, "Hey, your mother's in the hospital." I'm like, "Okay, well, she's gonna be good." So I didn't go to the hospital. On Valentine's Day, my father said, "No, you need to come here." And that's why Valentine's Day sometimes is challenging for me because that was the last time I actually saw her alive. But my family was up there. My mother was a very private person, so she had four brothers, and she didn't tell them she had cancer.
Oh, wow.
So it was really, because she was so private, only me, my father, and her prayer circle knew. So it was also hard because I didn't have anybody to really vent to about what I was feeling. But I knew that my mother was going to be okay, right? I never even in my mind thought that she was going to die. And so I got to the hospital and she was tubes, all that stuff. And basically they told me she was on a machine. So I didn't understand that, but I was like, okay. But when I got to the hospital and I saw my uncles, they literally were breaking down. And we're talking about the strongest men that I know are breaking down about their sister, that she's the only girl. And so I knew at that moment that something was different. And so one thing that God whispered in my ear is, she's waiting for you. And so when you said to me that, you said, if it's the will, I didn't necessarily say that to him, but I said what I needed to say to her to let her know it is well. It's well. And, our family had to make the decision on whether to take the plug out. Right? And the thing about it is, I didn't go to the hospital that next day. I actually went to work. I went to work and I actually got the call at work that she did not make it.
Oh, wow.
But what I remember is that I was comfortable only because I knew that I said what I needed to say to her. Right. And so I think that sometimes we have so many regrets.
That guilt.
And that's a lot of us, that's what holds up our grief, is that unprocessed guilt and regret. I should have did this. I should have went to the hospital. I should have did this. But what a lot of us have to understand is God's will is still God's will, whether you would have done that or not.
Right.
So a lot of us have to let go of what we did not do because it would not have changed God's mind about what his will was for that loved one's life.
Can you say that again?
Absolutely. It doesn't matter what we would have done. It would not have changed God's will for that person's life.
I think that I'm so glad you said that again, because I think that when it comes to things, we always, especially a loss, we always think about shoulda, coulda, wouldas.
Yep.
Like the past few years for me has been like a snowball of death. Like I've lost family members every 6 to 8 months. So to me, it's like, all right now, God. But I promised myself, after processing that grief, and I was, like you said, destructive fast.
Yeah.
I was, you talking about 18, fresh out the house, in college. I was drinking a fifth a day.
Yeah.
And the insane part about it was I didn't even know that was grief.
Yeah.
Everything else, I just thought that I was just,
living life. Yeah.
Living life.
Right. Yeah.
And it took, I had a boyfriend that was really close to my grandmother. He lived in Florida. When my grandmother passed, he had moved back because he was going to college. We broke up. I started, that grief started trying. I was like, okay, well, next.
Yeah.
So it was like, I'm drinking a fifth a day. I'm partying. It's this guy. It's that guy. It's this thing. It's that thing. And I didn't realize that unprocessed grief, I was holding on to guilt. I was holding on to regret, because that was the only argument my grandmother and I ever got into, and we never cleared the air.
Yeah.
So I promised myself that I'm always gonna be who I'm going to be who I am. But in relationships with people, I'm going to say what needs to be said. I'm going to talk about what needs to be talked about, because I don't want to have any regret.
Yeah.
But you never, it's so hard because you never know if you're going to have regrets.
Yeah.
But that changed my perspective on forgiveness.
But see, that's the thing about grief as well that we have to learn, is that there are, as much as we don't want to learn them, there are lessons in every loss we take. So whether it's a death, like there are friendships that I may have lost that I had to learn lessons from, that so that I could have different levels of friendship in the next season of my life. But there were lessons that I had to take from that loss, right? And even in my mother's death, there were things that I didn't want to see, of course, when she first died, but there were lessons. Just like you learned a lesson not to do certain things. So a lot of us have to, as much as we don't want to, we have to figure out, what is the lesson in this? What can I learn from what is happening so that I can be a better person, but also not experience this type of loss and this type of way again?
And so, because I just want to touch on the lesson part. How do we get to that point?
Yeah. So first, you have to process, right? This is the part that nobody likes. And I'm going to say this because you have to be intentional about it. When you are experiencing any type of loss, you're going to have to sit with yourself. Because whether people want to say it or not, I have a lot of people that love me. They cannot grieve for me.
Come on.
They can't grieve for me. So there is certain stuff that I have to sit with because it's my emotions, my feelings, the loss I feel. So I have to sit with myself and figure out, who am I after this loss?
That's deep.
Because I have now lost a piece of me. I don't care what it is. If it's a job, if it's a pet, if it whatever, I've lost a piece of me. So who am I identified as now that I've lost? And so the part of that is sitting with myself and being intentional about figuring out who I am now and how this loss has now affected my life moving forward.
God, I know I was an ugly mess.
but sitting with it is the only way that you're going to be able to process the grief enough to see the other side. I tell people you got to look past it.
You really gotta get to the other side though.
Yeah, it's a dirty, stinky, nasty process. I'm not. You probably gotta go ahead. I became a grief coach because for me, therapy was not enough. I think therapy is amazing.
Right.
But me sitting in somebody's chair once a week was not enough. So I got a grief coach because a coach, I can talk to them every day. They hold me accountable. It's like, hey, I'm there. Hey, did you do this? Hey. That's what I needed. I needed more.
And that's so crazy that you said that, because every time people run, because we lose people all the time, lose things. And I always tell people when they talking to me, because I'm like the go-to person.
Yeah.
So when people come to me with their grief, I always say, have you had grief counseling? And it's so funny to me because I've never actually had grief counseling. But in my mind, I've always had therapy.
Yeah.
Like I initially put myself in therapy when I was 13 because I was suicidal.
Yeah.
So going through therapy, I've realized that that's a tool.
Yeah.
But sometimes we need additional.
Yeah. I think that therapy and coaching is amazing. Some people just need coaching. Some people just need therapy. I went to therapy. I think therapy is a powerful tool that and I think therapy also is good for those people who have transitioned from grief to mental health diagnosis. See, there's a difference. You can be in grief, but a lot of times, and this is what happened for me, is that once I started processing my grief coach realized, okay, you have turned into something mental. So now you need to go back to therapy. And that's okay. But it's just the fact of having somebody holding you accountable and responsible for you. Right. And so I think that whether it's therapy, coaching, whatever, you need to have, or community. Right. And that's part of the reason why I created the community that I did, because some people, they just need somebody to talk to.
And they don't